Stop. Don't throw that out. That's the answer. Those 7 words, spoken with hesitation but certainty, cut through the tension like a blade. It was 2:13 a.m. on a rain-soaked Tuesday morning, and inside the glass tower of TechCore Innovations, chaos quietly brewed in the shadows of fluorescent lights. Maria Sanchez, a 39-year-old janitor, was on her regular night shift. With her earbuds in, pushing her mop cart down the hallway, she had passed by conference room 4B 1,000 times. But tonight was different. The door had been left open. Inside, a team of exhausted engineers sat slumped over laptops, whiteboards filled with frantic scribbles, empty coffee cups littering the floor like fallen soldiers. Their voices were raised in quiet panic, talking over each other, throwing out technical jargon that made little sense to anyone outside the elite engineering circle. Voltage irregularity, compressed memory stack failure, data loop corruption, words that might as well have been a foreign language. But Maria, over her many shifts, had learned to listen, not just with her ears, but with curiosity. She never spoke, just observed. And that night, her eyes landed on something that everyone else had missed, a crumpled blueprint, discarded like trash, barely sticking out from under the leg of a table. As a young engineer reached for the waste bin, blueprint in hand, Maria instinctively called out, "Wait, that's the only one with the double lines next to the power grid. Isn't that important?" Her voice wasn't loud. In fact, it trembled slightly, but it was enough to bring the room to a complete halt. Everyone turned to look at her, some in confusion, others in annoyance. A janitor interrupting their high-level meeting? For a second, no one said anything. One of the junior engineers, Max, squinted at the blueprint. He picked it up, studied the area Maria had mentioned, and his eyes slowly widened. "She's right," he muttered. "The older version had a loop-back redundancy line. It's missing in the new build." The room, previously buzzing with frantic energy, went completely still. The lead engineer snatched the page, scanned it, and then slammed it on the table. "Why didn't we test this version?" someone asked. "It got scrapped during the 3rd design phase," Max replied. "We thought the loop caused latency. But maybe it was the fail-safe," another whispered. In a blur, they loaded the design into the simulation software. The system, which had failed 3 critical tests that week, ran the new model using the discarded layout. And this time, no crash, no data loss. The compression held. The redundancy loop absorbed the voltage spike. The system, their $500 million prototype, was stable. For the first time in 72 hours, the room erupted in shocked laughter, cheers, and stunned silence. But amidst the celebration, all eyes returned to the janitor in the doorway. Maria, standing with a mop in one hand and a trash bag in the other, blinked in confusion. "I'm sorry," she said, backing away. "I didn't mean to." "No," the lead engineer said firmly. "You just saved us." By 8 a.m., the CEO of TechCore, Grant Wexler, was in the building. Known for being a tough, no-nonsense executive, he was already preparing a report for the board explaining why their product launch would be delayed and how they planned to recover from the loss. But when he entered the lab expecting bad news, he instead found engineers huddled around a simulation screen, high-fiving and grinning like college kids. He demanded an explanation, and got one. The janitor, the blueprint, the accidental genius move. He was skeptical at first, thought it was a joke, but then he reviewed the test results himself. Flawless, stable, efficient. Maria was immediately called in. Still wearing her TechCore issue jumpsuit and rubber gloves, she stood nervously in front of a table filled with executives and senior engineers. "So, Maria," the CEO asked, steepling his fingers, "how exactly did you know to look for the redundancy loop?" She shrugged, nervously wiping her hands on her uniform. "I didn't know exactly. I just remembered you guys were talking about power issues last week, and I'd seen that layout before, with the extra lines. I figured maybe it helped." That was all. No ego, no bravado, just quiet observation and intuition. Grant Wexler stared at her for a long moment, then did something no one in the room expected. He stood up, walked over to her, and extended his hand. "You just saved a $500 million project," he said. "What do you want, Maria? A raise? A bonus?" She hesitated. I just want to take care of my kids. Maybe work fewer hours, maybe study a bit more. He nodded. Done, but that's not all. You're joining our research team, effective immediately. We'll train you. You've got an eye for things most people miss. That's a gift. The room was stunned. A janitor, now a tech team member. Just like that. But it wasn't just a feel-good gesture. Over the next 6 months, Maria proved herself again and again. She wasn't just lucky. She was sharp, disciplined, and humble. And she became living proof that brilliance doesn't always come with a degree. Sometimes it comes with a mop and a curious mind. Maria Sanchez wasn't supposed to be in the room. Not in that way, not in that role. For the past 2 years, she'd swept those hallways, wiped those windows, and emptied those bins. All while the real work happened around her. But if you ask Maria, she'd tell you something most people never thought to consider. Cleaning didn't stop her from learning. In fact, it gave her front row access to a world most never get to see. Every night, while the world slept and the building dimmed to a soft hum, Maria would walk through the glass offices of TechCore Innovations and listen. Not just with her ears, but with a hunger. Conversations about machine learning, coding syntax, hardware integration, terms she'd never heard before, but slowly started piecing together. She'd pause her cleaning for a moment if something caught her ear. She watched how engineers argued through problems. She learned how diagrams told stories, how equations repeated, and she noticed patterns, not just in algorithms, but in people. The late-night researchers who always forgot to carry the one, the overconfident interns who rushed conclusions, the quiet developers who were always right but never listened to. And over time, without anyone realizing, Maria built her own mental map of the company's brain. Not on paper, not on a computer, but in memory. Because when you don't have time or resources, you learn to make use of everything, including the silence. But Maria's intelligence didn't begin at TechCore. It began long before, in a small 2-bedroom apartment where she raised 2 children on her own. Her life wasn't made of choices, it was made of survival. Her husband had left when their youngest was just 6 months old. No child support, no help, just Maria and the weight of the world. She worked nights so she could be present during the day. She cooked meals, juggled bills, helped with homework, and taught her kids one unshakable value. We may not have much, but we will always keep our heads high. And that applied to her too. During the nights after her shift ended and her kids were still asleep, she would take 1 hour to study, sometimes from a used laptop she bought secondhand, sometimes from YouTube, sometimes from textbooks borrowed from the local library. She wasn't trying to be an engineer. She just wanted to understand, because knowledge made her feel powerful in a world that often made her feel invisible. When other people scrolled through social media, Maria was watching MIT OpenCourseWare. When others binge-watched shows, she was reviewing science articles or tech blogs. Over time, all that hidden effort built something inside her, confidence. That confidence, however, had never been tested. Not until the moment she spoke in that conference room. And the truth is, when she said, "Isn't that important?" part of her immediately regretted it. That inner voice kicked in. The one that said, "You're not one of them. They'll laugh." But they didn't. In fact, they listened. And in that moment, Maria's years of quiet learning, unnoticed effort, and quiet humility all came together. Not because she wanted glory, not because she was trying to be seen, but because she saw something others didn't. It wasn't just a line on a blueprint. It was a memory from a dozen quiet nights pushing a mop across a floor while engineers debated blueprints in the background. She remembered a conversation from months ago. Something about how power loops worked like a buffer. Something about why the original design was too cautious. That one moment was the culmination of years of silent study. And for the first time, Maria saw what it felt like to matter in the room she used to just clean. TechCore Innovations wasn't just any tech company, it was the company, a rising star in Silicon Valley, famous for pushing the limits of artificial intelligence and data compression technology. Their latest project was nothing short of revolutionary, a quantum data compression device so advanced, it promised to cut storage costs by 80% while increasing speed tenfold. The tech world was buzzing. Industry leaders were calling it the future of data. Investors had already poured in over $500 million, and TechCore's stock was soaring in anticipation. Pre-orders from Fortune 500 companies flooded in. Licensing deals were already lined up. Everything hinged on this one product. But then, 1 week before launch, it all started falling apart. The prototype, which had performed flawlessly in early trials, began crashing under full load. At first, they thought it was a firmware glitch, then a voltage inconsistency, then a memory overflow. But every fix led to another failure. They recoded modules. They swapped out hardware. They brought in outside consultants. Nothing worked. Each failed test didn't just delay the product, it risked the entire company's reputation. The board was panicking. Partners threatened to pull out. Millions of dollars were at stake by the hour. In a closed-door emergency meeting, CEO Grant Wexler issued a chilling ultimatum. Fix it by Friday or the entire R&D leadership is gone. The engineers doubled their hours. Sleep became optional. Morale dropped like a stone. It was in that pressure cooker, at the edge of collapse, that Maria Sanchez's voice changed everything. Until that night, Maria had never even been seen by upper management. She was just part of the background, like the elevators or the vending machines. But when she casually pointed out the double lines next to the power grid on the discarded blueprint, something shifted in the room. The design she noticed was from an early stage of development. Version 1.3, a model that had been thrown out months ago for being too conservative. It included a voltage loop that engineers believed was slowing the compression process. In reality, that loop was preventing catastrophic failure by acting as a surge buffer. The new models had removed it to speed things up, unaware they just created a ticking time bomb. Maria didn't know all the terminology, but she knew what she saw, and she remembered what she heard. Her brain made a connection the rest of the room had missed because they were too close to the problem. It's the kind of insight that doesn't come from degrees. It comes from perspective. And that perspective, surprisingly, came from the janitor. As the engineers reran simulations with the old loop restored, the system didn't just pass the test, it performed better than ever. Cleaner, faster, stable. It was as if the missing puzzle piece had finally clicked into place. Just like that, the meltdown was over. The entire crisis, which had been on track to destroy the company's most valuable product, had been solved by someone nobody saw coming. Word spread quickly. By the next morning, every department head knew the name Maria Sanchez. Some were confused, others skeptical. But when the lead engineer presented the simulation data and described exactly what happened, jaws dropped. The prototype was now stable, and Maria was the reason. CEO Grant Wexler demanded to meet her personally. At first, Maria thought she was in trouble. She'd only spoken up because something didn't feel right. She didn't do it for attention. But when she walked into that executive conference room, wearing her janitor uniform, with nervous hands clasped in front of her, the energy was different, respectful, curious. Wexler didn't waste time. "I'm told you saved our company," he said flatly. Maria, always humble, just smiled and said, "I just pointed out something that looked off." But for the CEO, that was exactly the point. "You noticed something none of us did," he replied, "and that makes you more valuable than you realize." Right then and there, he offered Maria a full-time role in the tech division, complete with mentorship, training, and a salary that changed her life overnight. No interview, no red tape, just recognition. Because when a janitor solves a $500 million problem, you don't wait to give her a desk. Maria didn't say yes right away. When the CEO of a billion-dollar company offered her a role on the tech team, she thought it was a joke, or worse, a test. She looked around the room of engineers and executives, still wearing her cleaning gloves, still smelling faintly of floor wax, and wondered if she really belonged. "I appreciate it," she said cautiously, "but I don't have a degree. I don't even know if I'm qualified." But Grant Wexler leaned forward, eyes locked on hers. "You're not qualified by paper," he said. "You're qualified by instinct, and that's something we can't teach." The offer was real. So was the moment. In front of the entire R&D team, Maria Sanchez was officially welcomed as a junior systems analyst. Full salary, full benefits, child care assistance, education reimbursement, a signing bonus large enough to pay off all her debt, and a flexible schedule that allowed her to be there for her kids in ways she hadn't been able to for years. Some clapped, a few cried, but most stood in stunned silence, witnessing a moment they'd never forget, not because of pity or charity, but because it was earned. Maria didn't just guess her way into a solution. She saw something none of the trained experts saw. She used logic, observation, and memory. She trusted her instincts. And that's the kind of thinking the company had been trying to cultivate for years, hidden in plain sight. Her first day on the tech team felt surreal. No mop, no gloves, just a desk, a laptop, and a badge with her name on it. Maria Sanchez, Analyst, Tech Core Innovations. But even with all the changes, Maria didn't pretend to be someone she wasn't. She asked questions constantly. She took notes obsessively. She stayed late, not because she had to clean, but because she wanted to understand. Her humility made her respected. Her story made her admired. And her work ethic made her unstoppable. Within 3 months, she was contributing to code reviews. Within 6 months, she was co-authoring system reports. And by the end of the year, she'd helped design 3 new backup protocols that improved system redundancy by 28%. She didn't know it at the time, but one of her suggestions would later be filed under a provisional patent by the company, with her name listed as co-inventor. Grant Wexler would later describe Maria as the company's most unexpected competitive advantage. But even with all the attention, she stayed grounded. She never forgot the nights she went home with blisters on her hands and doubt in her heart. She never forgot what it was like to be invisible in a room full of experts. That's why she made a decision that would redefine TechCore's culture forever. One afternoon during a company-wide innovation summit, Maria took the stage, not as a keynote speaker, but as a story. Wexler introduced her personally and invited her to share her journey. She didn't come with slides or statistics. She came with one message. Talent doesn't always walk in through the front door. Sometimes it's already inside, just waiting to be seen. The room fell silent, then thunderous applause. Inspired by her words, TechCore launched a new internal initiative called Hidden Talent, a program dedicated to identifying and developing non-traditional employees, night staff, interns, temps, anyone whose potential had been overlooked. Maria was put in charge of it. She built mentorship programs, created evening workshops, and offered study stipends. She pushed to open up training sessions to any employee willing to learn, not just the ones with fancy degrees. And the results? Unbelievable. In just 1 year, TechCore promoted 3 custodial workers into data roles, a former receptionist into UX design, and a cafeteria server into IT. All because one janitor saw a loop on a blueprint and dared to speak. Maria didn't chase the spotlight. It found her. A year after she made the observation that saved TechCore's $500 million product, Maria Sanchez was no longer just a name in company records. She was a legend in the tech world. From late-night cleaning shifts to speaking at innovation conferences, her journey wasn't just about career change. It was a cultural shift, a symbol, a signal to every corporate boardroom, every HR department, every skeptical manager who ever said, "They're just a janitor." What Maria represented was more than a fluke or a one-time miracle. She was the living, breathing proof that brilliance often walks past unnoticed. That talent isn't always loud, polished, or credentialed. It's sometimes soft-spoken, self-taught, and wrapped in overalls. But despite the attention and admiration, Maria never forgot where she came from. She still drove the same used sedan she'd owned for years, not out of necessity anymore, but because she liked it. She still packed her kids' school lunches every morning, still checked homework every night, and still carried herself with quiet humility. But make no mistake, Maria had changed, not in her values, but in her belief in herself. She now knew that her voice mattered, that her thoughts held value, and that being underestimated could be a superpower, because when people don't see you coming, you surprise them with greatness. As TechCore continued to thrive, partly thanks to her contribution, Maria was invited to join the company's innovation board. At first, she declined. "I'm still learning," she said, but the CEO responded simply, "So are we." It was on that board that Maria proposed something that would shake up corporate norms everywhere. She called it the second shift program. The idea was simple: offer training, mentorship, and internal mobility to night shift workers, janitors, security guards, maintenance staff, kitchen workers, anyone who typically worked behind the scenes. If they showed interest in learning or transitioning to tech roles, the company would invest in their education and growth. There was some pushback. "What if we train them and they leave?" someone asked. Maria responded without flinching. "What if you don't train them and they stay?" The program launched quietly, almost as an experiment, but within months it became one of the most talked about initiatives in Silicon Valley. It turned out Maria wasn't the only hidden gem in the building. A maintenance worker with a background in electrical engineering from another country quickly joined the IoT division. A cafeteria cashier who used to code for fun in her teens transitioned into front-end development. A night security guard who had an eye for design ended up joining the UX team after completing Maria's crash course on user interfaces. Maria personally mentored many of them, not from a pedestal, but from beside them. She knew the fear of asking dumb questions, the shame of not knowing the lingo, the pressure to prove you belonged, and that made her a better leader than most. News of the program spread, articles were written, documentaries proposed, podcasts wanted interviews. Maria turned most of them down. "I didn't do any of this for fame," she explained. "I did it because people gave me a chance. I'm just paying it forward." But the recognition kept coming anyway. She was invited to speak at Stanford, MIT, and even Harvard. Tech magazines named her one of the top 10 most influential women in technology. A photo of her from her janitor days, gloves on, standing by a whiteboard with engineers around her, became an iconic image, symbolizing untapped potential. Still, Maria stayed grounded. She continued to live in the same neighborhood. She volunteered at her kids' school. On weekends, she ran a free local workshop at the library teaching basic coding and troubleshooting to anyone who wanted to learn. Her motto was printed on the wall: "You don't have to start from the top. You just have to start." Her children, once unsure about their future, were now thriving. Her daughter, inspired by her mother's journey, announced she wanted to be an engineer. Her son, once shy and often sick from asthma, now proudly told his friends, "My mom's a genius." In TechCore, their reputation soared. Investors loved the company's story. More importantly, so did future employees. Applications poured in from people who had never considered tech as a path before. They saw in Maria what they hoped others would see in them. Inside the company, culture transformed. People no longer ignored the night crew. They said hello. They asked questions. They offered help. And for the first time, many of the invisible workers started to feel like they belonged. It wasn't just about diversity. It was about dignity. And it all started with one woman who noticed a crumpled blueprint and chose to speak. One day during a TechCore town hall, a new intern asked Maria a question during the Q&A. "What made you speak up that night? Weren't you scared?" Maria paused for a moment, then said, "Yes, I was terrified, but I thought about what I tell my kids when they're afraid to raise their hand in class. I tell them, speak up, not because you're sure, but because you might be right." That night, I remembered my own advice. The room went quiet, then applause. And it wasn't the polite kind. It was the kind that rises from respect, not for her story, but for her courage. In time, Maria's second shift program was adopted by multiple companies across the U.S. A bill inspired by her story was introduced in Congress to support continuing education for night shift and low-wage workers. And the once unthinkable idea that janitors and security guards might be future engineers became a national conversation. But for Maria, the greatest victory wasn't headlines or accolades. It was seeing people look at her the way she always wished someone would. Not with pity, not with surprise, but with respect. Because in a world obsessed with status, she proved something profound. Greatness isn't about where you start. It's about whether you see what others don't and dare to say it out loud. If this story moved you, drop a comment below. Tell us what part hit you the hardest. Hit that like button if you believe brilliance has no job title. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that will restore your faith in people. Because sometimes the person who saves the day isn't at the top of the company. They're the one cleaning it. And all they need is one chance to prove it.